Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to do something a little dangerous. We're going to take the narrative of the modern Middle East, the story you see on the news, the one that shapes foreign policy, the one that feels almost like common sense at this point, and we're going to just dismantle it, brick by brick.
It's definitely a heavy lift today.
Yeah.
We are questioning some of the most, bedrock assumptions of the conflict.
Right, because if you look at the world right now, there's a very specific story being told about the Jewish people and the Islamic world. It's framed as a clash of civilizations.
Yeah.
On one side, you have the West, often called the Judeo-Christian Alliance, standing as the protector. And on the other side, you have the Muslim world, which is presented as the natural, historical, and existential enemy of the Jews.
It's a binary that feels intuitive to a lot of people today.
Yeah.
The idea is that this hostility is ancient, inevitable even, and religious, that Islam itself is the threat.
But what if that is completely backward? And I don't mean slightly off. I mean, what if the historical reality is 180 degrees opposite to what we are told?
And that's exactly what the treatise we're looking at today argues.
It's titled History's Mirror: Jewish Survival, Islamic Sanctuary, and the Tragedy of the Present Middle East Conflict by Dr. Umar Ardo.
Dr. Ardo is a historian and a politician, and his work here is, well, it's essentially a corrective history. He says that the narrative we're fed today, that the Muslim world is the historic enemy of the Jews, is a manufactured lie.
A lie. That's a strong word.
It is. His core thesis is that for the vast majority of the last 2,000 years, the existential threat to Jewish survival came from Christian Europe and the sanctuary, the place where Jewish life actually survived and thrived. That was the Islamic world.
He calls this the Great Inversion. The roles have flipped, but our memories haven't caught up. So our mission for this deep dive is to look into this mirror. We need to understand the Christian condition of persecution, the reality of the Islamic sanctuary, and then try to figure out how we ended up in this modern geopolitical mess where history has been turned on its head.
And just a quick disclaimer for you listening, Dr. Ardo's treatise is a polemic. It's a very strong argument, and it's meant to challenge the Western conscience. We're here to unpack his arguments and follow his historical logic, which leads to some very uncomfortable places for the Western world.
Okay, so let's start there. With the Christian condition. I think most people have a vague idea that Europe was anti-Semitic. We know about the ghettos, things like that. But Ardo argues this wasn't just, prejudice, it was structural.
That is the key distinction.
Yeah.
It wasn't just that people didn't like their neighbors. In medieval Europe, anti-Semitism was theological. It was rooted in the charge of deicide.
Deicide, the idea that the Jewish people were collectively and internally responsible for the death of Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
Which is a heavy charge. If you believe a group of people killed God, you can justify pretty much anything you do to them.
And the church fathers, from St. Augustine onward, they solidified this. Ardo points out that this theology created a society where Jewish suffering was seen as a righteous punishment. It wasn't a bug in the system, it was the system.
And this wasn't just spoken from the pulpit, it was written into law. The treatise lists the restrictions in the High Middle Ages, and it is just suffocating. You had legal inferiority, where a Jew couldn't testify against a Christian. You had the Jew badge forced clothing markers so they could be identified on sight.
Which, as Ardo notes, is a chilling precursor to the yellow stars of the 20th century. But the economic trap is also crucial to understand. The church banned Christians from usury, which is lending money with interest. But the European economy needed credit to function. So who did they force into that role?
The Jews. They were banned from the guilds, banned from owning land, banned from the military. So they were backed into a corner where they had to be the moneylenders.
Which was a trap. It made them indispensable to the economy, but also the perfect scapegoat. When the king spent too much money or the crops failed, you didn't blame the king, you blamed the predatory moneylender. It's structurally engineered resentment.
But Ardo points to a specific date where this simmering resentment just boiled over into mass slaughter. 1096, the First Crusade.
Yeah, we usually think of the Crusades as a war over there in the Holy Land. But Ardo emphasizes that the violence started here, in Europe. Before the Crusaders even left for Jerusalem, they marched through the Rhineland in Germany and massacred entire Jewish communities.
The source describes it as a frenzy. These weren't soldiers following orders. These were mobs convinced that killing infidels at home was just as good as killing them in Jerusalem.
It set a precedent. It established that Jewish life in Christendom was cheap. And that leads to the era of expulsions. I think we forget the scale of this. England expelled every single Jewish person in 1290.
Every single one.
France did it in 1306, then again in 1394, Spain in 1492. Ardo paints a picture of a people who are perpetually refugees within Europe.
And this brings us to the darkest connection Ardo makes. He draws a straight line from this medieval theology to the Holocaust. Now, usually we hear that the Nazis were a modern, secular aberration, but Ardo says, not so fast.
No, he argues that the Holocaust was the industrialized culmination of European culture. You cannot have a Holocaust without 1,000 years of dehumanization preceding it. The Nazis didn't invent the badges or the ghettos or the demonization. They just, optimized the technology of killing. Ardo's point is that this genocide happened in the heart of Christian Europe, not in the Middle East. It was a European product.
So, if Europe was a graveyard, where was the sanctuary? This is the part of the story that gets left out of the Clash of Civilizations narrative.
Right. While Europe was expelling and killing, the Islamic world was operating under a completely different legal framework. Ardo explains the concept of the dhimmi and the al-Kabab, the people of the book.
Let's unpack that, because I don't want to paint a picture of a utopia where everyone was holding hands. It wasn't modern equality.
No, and Ardo is very clear on that. It was a hierarchy. Muslims were at the top, but Jews and Christians were recognized as legitimate monotheists. They paid a tax, the jizya, and in exchange, they were granted state protection. Their lives, their property, and their right to worship were guaranteed by Islamic law.
That sounds like a technicality, but compared to Europe, that's the difference between life and death. In Europe, your safety depended on the mood of the mob or the king. In Islam, it was a legal contract.
Precisely. And because they weren't viewed as Christ killers or these demonic figures, they were integrated into society. This leads to what historians call the Golden Age, specifically in Al-Andalus, or Muslim Spain.
This is one of my favorite parts of history because it just destroys the idea that these groups can't live together. Between the 8th and 15th centuries, you had Jewish viziers, poets, doctors, scientists, all serving in Muslim courts.
Ardo lists giants like Maimonides, the philosopher and physician, or Hasdai ibn Shaprut, who is essentially the foreign minister of the caliphate in Cordoba. These people weren't just surviving, they were shaping the culture. They were writing in Arabic, debating Greek philosophy. It was a symbiotic relationship.
But all good things come to an end. 1492. We all know Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but that was also the year the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella finished the Reconquista of Spain.
And their first order of business was ethnic cleansing. The Alhambra Decree. Jews had to convert, leave, or die. The golden age of Spain was over.
And here is the plot twist that Ardo really hammers home. When the Christians kicked them out, who took them in?
The Ottoman Empire. The Muslim world, Sultan Bayezid II, didn't just passively accept them. He sent the Ottoman Navy to rescue the refugees.
There's that great anecdote in the treatise where the Sultan mocks the Spanish king. He says, "You call Ferdinand a wise ruler. He impoverishes his own country and enriches mine."
That quote tells you everything you need to know. The Ottomans saw the Jews as a resource. They saw skilled doctors, artisans, merchants, and they welcomed them. And Ardo describes how they settled in cities like Constantinople, Aleppo, and especially Salonika.
Salonika became a powerhouse.
It was known as the Mother of Israel. For centuries, it was a majority Jewish city, operating as a major port of the Ottoman Empire. Ardo's point is that this wasn't an accident. It was the result of the Islamic world acting as a sanctuary. For centuries, when a Jew in Europe packed their bags to flee persecution, they didn't run away from the Muslim world. They ran toward it.
So we've established the historical baseline. Europe equals persecution. Islam equals sanctuary. Now, we have to look at the present. Section 3 of Ardo's treatise is called The Great Inversion, because if you look at a map today, everything we just said seems like a fantasy.
It is a cruel irony, as Ardo puts it. Today, the State of Israel positions itself as the guarantor of Jewish safety. But who are its best friends? The United States, Germany, France, the UK, the geopolitical descendants of the very civilization that hunted them for a millennium.
And the enemy.
The enemy is the Muslim world. The descendants of the sanctuary are now framed as the existential threat.
So Dr. Ardo argues that this narrative that Muslims are the natural enemy is manufactured. It's a recent invention. But why? What purpose does it serve?
Well, Ardo argues it serves to cover up a civilizational hypocrisy. He talks about the concept of outsourcing guilt.
This is a heavy concept. Break that down for us.
The argument is that the West has never really paid for its crimes against the Jewish people. Europe committed the Holocaust. But Europe didn't give up Bavaria to create a Jewish state. Instead, the West supported the displacement of Palestinians, a people who had nothing to do with the Holocaust, to solve a European problem.
So from the perspective of the Muslim street, they are paying the bill for Germany's crimes.
Exactly. And that generates intense righteous anger. Ardo argues that the West looks at this anger over displacement, occupation, and war, and conveniently labels it antisemitism. They say, look, these Muslims hate Jews. Disregarding that, for 1,000 years they lived together just fine.
It's a way of erasing the political reality. If you say, they hate us because of their religion, then there is no political solution. It's just an eternal war. But if you say, they are angry because of a specific political injustice, well, then you have to deal with that injustice.
That is the crux of the manufactured threat. By framing Islam as the enemy, the West absolves itself of its own history and it delegitimizes the Palestinian grievance.
Ardo also touches on how the memory of the Holocaust is used in this inversion. He says it has been nationalized and militarized.
It's a tragedy within a tragedy. The lesson of the Holocaust should be universal. Never again should mean never again for anyone. No more ghettos, no more collective punishment, no more dehumanization. But Ardo argues that the memory has been weaponized to justify those exact things against Palestinians. It's used to claim an eternal moral exemption.
It's the idea that because we were victims of the ultimate crime, anything we do now is justified as self-defense.
Right. And Ardo says this effectively erases the history of the sanctuary. It forces the world to forget the Golden Age and accept this new dark reality where Jews and Muslims are sworn enemies.
So we've diagnosed the illness, we've seen the inversion. What is the cure? How does Dr. Ardo conclude this treatise?
He offers lessons from the mirror, and he has hard words for everyone.
Let's start with the lesson for the West and for Israel.
The historical lesson is about the nature of survival. Ardo argues that Jewish survival was never guaranteed by F-35s or iron walls. Historically, whenever Jews relied on domination or isolation, it ended in disaster. Their survival was guaranteed by integration and law, the specific conditions provided by the Islamic sanctuary.
So true security comes from being a neighbor, not a fortress.
Precisely. You cannot build a safe house on a foundation of other people's graveyards. Ardo warns that the current path rely on the West's military power while oppressing the local population is a historical anomaly that cannot last.
And what about the lesson for the Muslim world? Because there is a lot of rage there right now, and it's easy to let that rage turn into blind hatred.
This is where Ardo challenges his own community. He warns against amnesia, he says. Do not let the crimes of the present erase the glory of the past. It is very easy right now for a young Muslim to look at Gaza and conclude that Jews have always been the enemy.
But Ardo says that is a trap.
It is a defeat. If you accept that narrative, you are accepting the West's lie. He urges the Muslim world to reclaim the narrative of the sanctuary, to be proud of the fact that when Europe was burning books and people, Islam was protecting them. He wants them to use that history as a blueprint for the future.
That is such a powerful reframing. Instead of, we have always fought, it's, we once protected each other and we can do it again.
It changes the conflict from a cosmic religious battle, which can never be solved, into a political problem. And political problems have solutions.
The treatise ends with that metaphor of the mirror. History is a mirror.
And mirrors don't always show you what you want to see. For the West, the mirror reflects a history of barbarism. For the Muslim world, it reflects a noble history that is currently being tested by fire. And for everyone, it reflects the distortion of the present.
It really forces you to check your assumptions. When you turn on the news tonight and hear about the inevitable conflict in the Middle East, Dr. Ardo is asking you to pause, to ask, is this inevitable? Or is it a choice we are making by ignoring the last 1,000 years?
If the existential threat is a manufactured story, then we have the power to write a different ending.
That is the thought we want to leave you with. It's a lot to process, and it challenges a lot of deeply held beliefs, but that's what a deep dive is for.
Absolutely. History is the only map we have. We better make sure we're reading it right.
Thank you for listening. We'll be back with another deep dive soon. Take care.